The question is simple. Who killed Hae Min Lee? For more than 2 decades, the official answer was Adnan Syed, her ex-boyfriend. A jury said so. He was sentenced to life in prison. Case closed. But it was never really closed, not for Adnan, who always said he was innocent. Not for his family, and eventually, not for millions of people who heard his story. The case is a mess of conflicting stories, forgotten details, and evidence that seems to crumble the harder you look at it. To understand where we are now, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to 1999. Hae Min Lee was a bright, popular high school senior in Baltimore County. She was a daughter, a friend, and athlete. She had a new boyfriend named Don. She had a recent ex-boyfriend named Adnan Syed. On January 13, 1999, she disappeared after school. Her body was found about a month later in Leakin Park, a place known for discarded bodies. She had been strangled. The police investigation quickly focused on Adnan. Their theory was simple and classic. He was a possessive ex-boyfriend, heartbroken and angry. His honor had been slighted. So he killed her. It's a story as old as time, one that juries easily understand. The state didn't have any physical evidence linking Adnan to the crime. No DNA, no fingerprints, no fibers. Nothing of Adnan's was found on or near Hae's body. Nothing of Hae's was found in Adnan's car or on his clothes. This is a huge problem in a murder. So, without physical evidence, the prosecution built its case on 2 pillars: the testimony of a guy named Jay Wilds and a record of cell phone calls. So Jay Wilds was the state's star witness. He was an acquaintance of Adnan's. He was a bit of an outsider, a pot dealer. His story was cinematic. He claimed Adnan told him he was going to kill Hae. He said Adnan showed up at Best Buy that afternoon and showed him Hae's body in the trunk of her car. And Jay then helped Adnan bury her body in Leakin Park later that night. It was a horrifying, detailed account. It was exactly what the jury needed to hear. The second pillar was Adnan's new cell phone. The police got the records for it. They showed a series of calls made on the day Hae disappeared. An expert from AT&T testified that 2 specific calls, which pinged a cell tower near Leakin Park, placed Adnan's phone in the area where Hae's body was buried at the exact time Jay said they were burying her. This was the scientific proof. It seemed to lock Jay's story into place. The witness and the technology pointing to one person: Adnan Syed. Adnan had a possible alibi. A classmate named Asia McLean said she saw him at the Woodlawn Public Library right after school during the time the state claimed he was murdering Hae. She even wrote him letters in jail about it. But Adnan's lawyer, Cristina Gutierrez, never contacted her. She never became a witness. The jury never heard her story. And so, Adnan Syed was convicted. The story seems solid enough. The jealous ex, the accomplice who confessed, the cell phone records that backed it all up. And for 15 years, that was the story. Adnan was in a maximum security prison. The case was over. Then came the podcast. In 2014, Serial revisited the case, and it exposed the cracks in those 2 pillars of the state's case. The cracks were so big, the whole structure started to wobble. Let's start with Jay. The podcast showed that Jay's story wasn't just one story. It was many stories. He told one version to the police in his first interview, then a different version in the second. His story at the trial was different again. Key details kept changing. Where did Adnan show him the body? First, it was a strip on Route 40. Then, it was a Best Buy parking lot. What time did things happen? The timeline shifted constantly. Why was he even involved? He never gave a clear, believable reason for helping his friend bury a body. If you're telling the truth, the core of your story usually stays the same. The details might get fuzzy, but the main events don't change. Jay's main events change. This raised a huge red flag. Why was he lying? Was he minimizing his own involvement? Was he trying to protect someone else? Or was the whole story a fabrication he was coached into by the police? No, we don't know. But his credibility, once you look closer, is a wreck. The state's entire case was built on a foundation of shifting sand. Then there was the second pillar, the cell phone records. This seemed like hard science. A phone pings a tower, it's a fact. But Serial uncovered a crucial document. It was a fax cover sheet from AT&T that came with the cell records provided to the police. It included a warning. It said that for incoming calls, the location data was not reliable. It shouldn't be used to determine a phone's location. This was a bombshell. The 2 critical pings that placed Adnan's phone in Leakin Park, the ones the prosecutor used to seal the deal, were from incoming calls. According to the phone company's own warning, that evidence was junk. It meant nothing. Adnan's lawyer at the time, Cristina Gutierrez, either never saw this warning or didn't understand its importance. The jury certainly never heard about it. They were told the pings were reliable. They were told it was proof it wasn't. So now both pillars were broken. The star witness was a serial liar. The scientific evidence was based on a faulty premise. What was left of the case against Adnan? The motive? He and Hae were still friends after breaking up. Many of their friends testified to that. They were teenagers, they broke up, they got back together, they dated other people. The portrait of a violently jealous, honor-obsessed killer didn't really fit the Adnan everyone knew. Without Jay's story and the cell tower pings, you have a case with no timeline, no murder weapon, no physical evidence, and a weak motive. You have reasonable doubt everywhere. This is why the case captured so many people. It wasn't just about whether Adnan was innocent, it was about whether he should have ever been convicted. And the answer, for many, was a clear no. If Adnan Syed didn't kill Hae Min Lee, then who did? This is where the story goes beyond the podcast and into years of investigation by lawyers, journalists, and amateur detectives. Several other names have come up. Plausible suspects who were either overlooked or not fully investigated at the time. Let's look at Jay Wilds again. If his story about Adnan was a lie, why did he lie? The simplest explanation is that he was involved. Deeply involved. He knew where Hae's car was. That's a fact nobody disputes. He led the police to it. How did he know if Adnan didn't tell him? Maybe he knew because he was there when it was parked. What would be Jay's motive? One theory revolves around his girlfriend, Stephanie. Stephanie was a very close friend of Adnan's. Adnan had just bought Stephanie a birthday gift the day before Hae disappeared. Jay was known to be very jealous when it came to Stephanie. Another theory is that it was related to his drug dealing. Maybe a deal went wrong, maybe Hae stumbled upon something she shouldn't have. These are just theories, but Jay's deep, admitted involvement in the aftermath of the crime makes him a logical suspect in the crime itself. He had knowledge that only the killer, or someone close to the killer, would have. By pinning it on Adnan, a popular, well-liked kid from a different social circle, he might have saved himself. Then there's the person who found the body, a man who went by Mr. S. His story was bizarre. He was a maintenance worker at a local school. He said he stopped his car on the side of a road to relieve himself. He walked over 100 feet into the dense woods of Lincoln Park and just happened to find Hae's partially buried body. The Lincoln Park is huge. Her body was camouflaged. His discovery was, by his own account, a complete accident. But there were strange things about Mr. S. He had a history of indecent exposure. He was a known streaker. Why was he really in those woods? He also gave conflicting accounts of his discovery. The police did investigate him. They gave him a polygraph test, which he failed. But they seemed to dismiss him as a suspect fairly quickly. Some find his story too convenient, too strange to be a simple coincidence. For years, those were the main alternative theories. Jay did it. Or maybe Mr. S., but then a new name emerged, one that the prosecution itself would later admit was a major problem. Ronald Lee Moore. Moore was a serial rapist and burglar who had been released from prison just days before Hae's murder. He had a long and violent criminal history. He targeted and killed young women. He lived in the Baltimore area. He was active at the time Hae was killed. He died by suicide in a Louisiana prison in 2008, so he could never be questioned about it. For years, his name wasn't connected to the case, but Adnan's later legal team, led by Rabia Chaudhry and others, pushed for new DNA testing on the evidence from the crime scene. They wanted to see if any unknown male DNA could be found. For a long time, the state fought this. But things changed. In 2022, the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office took a fresh look at the case. They had new prosecutors who weren't tied to the original conviction. They reviewed the old police files, and they found something stunning. They found notes that showed the police in 1999 knew about another potential suspect. This suspect had allegedly threatened to kill Hae. He had a motive. The notes about this were never given to Adnan's defense team. This is a major legal violation called a Brady violation. The prosecution is required to share any evidence that might help the defendant. They didn't. The prosecutors also acknowledged that the information about Ronald Lee Moore was significant. He had a known pattern of committing crimes just like this one. He was a viable suspect who was never properly considered. The combination of these failures, the undisclosed evidence, the questionable cell phone data, the unreliable witness led the state's attorney to a shocking conclusion. They no longer had confidence in the original conviction. In September 2022, a judge agreed. Adnan Syed's conviction was vacated. He walked out of the courthouse a free man after spending 23 years in prison. It was a surreal moment, but he wasn't cleared yet. The state had 30 days to decide whether to drop the charges or to try him again. During that time, they got the results of new DNA testing. The evidence tested included Hae's clothes and shoes. For the first time, DNA was recovered. It was not Adnan Syed's. It was not on the National DNA Database. The prosecutors announced that DNA found on Hae's shoes was from an unknown male. Later reports confirmed that Ronald Lee Moore could not be excluded as a contributor to this DNA sample. While it wasn't a definitive match, it was another piece of evidence pointing away from Adnan and towards a known violent criminal. In October 2022, the state dropped all charges against Adnan Syed. He was officially an innocent man in the eyes of the law. The prosecutors apologized for what had happened. They said they were now focused on pursuing other suspects. The answer to who killed Hae Min Lee seemed to be pointing strongly towards someone like Ronald Lee Moore. But the case took another bizarre legal turn. Hae Min Lee's family felt they had been wronged in the process of Adnan's release. Her brother argued he wasn't given enough notice to attend the hearing where the conviction was vacated. He felt his rights as a victim's representative had been violated. An appellate court agreed with him. In 2023, they reinstated Adnan's conviction. This was not a ruling on guilt or innocence. It was purely about procedure. The court said the previous hearing had been unfair to the Lee family and needed to be done over. So, as of now, Adnan Syed is in a strange legal limbo. His conviction is technically back on the books, but he remains free while the courts sort out the next steps. The state's attorney's office still maintains that he is innocent and that they will not prosecute him again. So where does that leave us? Who killed Hae Min Lee? We are further from a simple answer than ever before, but we are much closer to a complicated truth. The case against Adnan Syed was deeply, fatally flawed. It was built on the word of an unreliable witness, supported by faulty science and secured by a defense that failed its client. He may have been convicted by a jury, but the evidence to support that conviction has evaporated under scrutiny. It is very possible, even likely, that Adnan Syed is innocent, that he lost more than 2 decades of his life for a crime he didn't commit, that the real killer was never pursued. The evidence pointing towards Ronald Lee Moore is compelling. A violent predator, free at the time, whose modus operandi fits the crime, and whose DNA may have been on the victim's shoes. He represents a catastrophic failure of the initial investigation. If the police had looked beyond the easy narrative of the jealous ex-boyfriend, they might have found him. Jay Wilds remains a figure of intense mystery. Was he a pawn, terrified by the police into telling a story they wanted to hear? Or was he the real killer, a master manipulator who framed a high school kid to cover his own tracks? His inconsistencies suggest he was hiding something profound. What he was hiding is still the central mystery of the case. And there is Dawn, the new boyfriend. He was Hae's boyfriend at the time of her death. His alibi was his mother, who was also his boss at Lens Crafters. The police seem to accept this alibi without much digging. In a case full of shoddy police work, it's another question that was never fully answered. What is certain is the tragedy at the center of it all. Hae Min Lee, a young woman full of life and promise, was brutally murdered. Her family has been through an unimaginable ordeal. For years they believed they had justice. They believe the man responsible was in prison. Now that certainty is gone. They are left with only questions, and the same raw grief they felt in 1999. Their search for peace and closure has been thrown back to the beginning. The legal system failed. It failed Hae by possibly letting her real killer go free. It failed Adnan by convicting him on a case that should have never gone to trial. It failed the public by presenting a story of simple justice that was anything but. So, who killed Hae Min Lee? We don't know for sure. It could have been Ronald Lee Moore, the serial killer. It could have been Jay Wilds, the only person who admitted to being there. It could have been someone else entirely, a person whose name we've never even heard. The only thing we can say with a high degree of certainty is who it probably wasn't. It probably wasn't Adnan Syed. And after all these years, that simple, devastating fact changes everything. The case is not closed. It is wide open, and justice for Hae Min Lee is still waiting.